In 1870, a gallon of kerosene cost 26 cents. By 1897, it cost 6 cents. A 77% price drop in 27 years. And that was not the market working. That was not competition driving efficiency. That was not technological progress making production cheaper for everyone. That was one man, one single human being, engineering total control over every step between crude oil in the ground and the lamp burning in your living room, and then using that control to set the price of light for an entire nation. His name was John D. Rockefeller. And before we get into how he did it, look at this number. In 1913, his personal fortune was $900 million. That was nearly 3% of the entire GDP of the United States. Not the revenue of his company, not the combined assets of his business empire, his personal net worth. Convert that into today's dollars, and you land somewhere between $280 billion and $418 billion. More than Elon Musk, more than Jeff Bezos, more than both of them combined, more than the GDP of most countries on Earth. To put that in concrete terms, in 1913, the United States government collected approximately $714 million in total federal revenue. Rockefeller's personal fortune was larger than the entire federal budget. But here is what most people get wrong about Rockefeller. His wealth did not come from oil. Plenty of men found oil and stayed poor. His wealth came from controlling the infrastructure that oil had to pass through to reach anyone. The pipes, the refineries, the railroad cars, the storage tanks, the distribution network. He did not own the oil. He owned the system the oil could not move without. And understanding the difference between those two things is the key to understanding everything that follows. When the first commercial oil well was drilled in Titusville, Pennsylvania in 1859, the news spread fast. Within months, the region was flooded with prospectors, wildcatters, and speculators from across the country. It looked exactly like the California gold rush of a decade earlier. Men arriving with borrowed money, big dreams, and almost no real information about where the oil actually was. And like every gold rush in history, most of them lost everything. The problem with oil drilling in 1860 was simple. The price of crude was completely unstable. When a new well came in strong, it flooded the market and the price collapsed. Crude sold for $10 a barrel 1 month and 10 cents the next. A man could strike oil on Monday and be financially ruined by Friday if enough other wells came in the same week. The drillers had no control over price, no control over supply, and no control over whether the oil they pulled from the ground was worth more than the cost of pulling it. Rockefeller watched all of this from Cleveland. He was 20 years old, and he made a calculation that almost no one else around him made. Drilling was a lottery. Refining was a toll booth. Think about what that means. A toll booth does not care who built the road. It does not care how much traffic there is, or where the cars are going, or whether the economy is good or bad. It collects a fee from every vehicle that passes through. The more traffic, the more revenue. And crucially, the toll booth owner does not take the risk that the road builder took. That was refining. Whoever refined the oil collected a margin on every barrel, regardless of who drilled it, regardless of what crude was trading at that week. The refiner sat in the middle of the chain. And the middle of the chain, in any commodity industry, is where the money actually accumulates, not at the point of extraction, where prices are volatile and capital costs are enormous. Not at the point of retail sale, where margins are thin. In the middle, where you process, store, and move the product, and collect a fee every single time. In 1863, at age 24, Rockefeller put $4,000 into his first Cleveland refinery in partnership with a man named Samuel Andrews. 2 years later, he bought out his partners for $72,500 and took full control. That single decision, to own the operation entirely rather than share it, became the template for every move he made for the next 40 years. By 1865, Rockefeller owned the largest single refinery in Cleveland. But owning the largest refinery in one city was not enough. The question he was asking was not, how do I grow? It was, How do I make it structurally impossible for anyone else to compete? The answer was vertical integration, and he pursued it with a precision that no businessman of his era had ever attempted at scale. Most refinery owners in 1865 bought their barrels from outside suppliers. Standard rate, $2.50 per barrel. Rockefeller built his own barrel factory. His cost, 96 cents per barrel. On millions of barrels per year, that single change saved him more money than most of his competitors made in total profit. He bought his own railroad tank cars. At the time, oil was shipped in wooden barrels stacked in standard freight cars, an inefficient, expensive, and physically wasteful method. Rockefeller's purpose-built tank cars cut his per-unit shipping cost dramatically, while competitors continued paying the standard barrel freight rate. He hired his own chemists, some of the best industrial chemists in America, to squeeze more usable product out of every barrel of crude. His competitors were processing crude and discarding the byproducts as waste. Rockefeller's chemists turned those byproducts into lubricating oil for industrial machinery, paraffin wax for candles, and chemical inputs for paint manufacturing. Every barrel of crude that his competitors processed once, Rockefeller processed into 4 or 5 separate revenue streams. He even built his own pipelines to move crude from the Pennsylvania fields to his Cleveland refineries, eliminating the cost of paying middlemen to transport raw oil. The cumulative effect of these decisions was not incremental. It was structural. Every dollar his competitors spent on outside services was a dollar Rockefeller had already eliminated from his own cost structure. And because he was processing more oil than anyone else in the country, every efficiency improvement compounded faster than it could for a smaller operator. His cost per barrel dropped year after year. His competitors' costs stayed the same. By 1870, when he formally incorporated Standard Oil of Ohio with a capitalization of $1 million, his refineries were already so much more cost-efficient than the competition that a direct price war would have been financially suicidal for anyone who tried to fight him. But Rockefeller was not satisfied with a cost advantage. He wanted a structural advantage, one that could not be competed away. For that, he needed to control something his competitors could not replicate on their own. He needed the railroads. In 1872, Rockefeller negotiated what became known as the South Improvement Company scheme, a secret arrangement with 3 of the largest railroad operators in America: New York Central, owned by Cornelius Vanderbilt's family, the Erie Railroad, and the Pennsylvania Railroad. These 3 railroads together controlled the primary shipping routes between the Pennsylvania oil fields and the major East Coast markets. Without them, refined oil could not move. Every refinery in America depended on their rates. The deal Rockefeller struck had 2 components, and both of them were, by any reasonable definition, extraordinary. Component 1. Standard Oil received shipping rates dramatically lower than the published rates available to competitors. On some routes, Standard Oil paid half the rate that independent refiners paid. On a product where margins were already thin, that difference was often the difference between profit and loss. Component 2, and this is the mechanism that made the arrangement truly devastating to competitors. The railroads agreed to pay Standard Oil a rebate on every barrel shipped by a rival company, not just discounts on Standard Oil's own shipments, payments from the full-price shipments of everyone else. Every time a competitor loaded oil onto a railroad car and paid the standard rate, a portion of that payment was transferred to Rockefeller. His competitors were financing his expansion every time they tried to ship their own product. When the arrangement leaked to the press in early 1872, the public reaction was immediate and furious. Rival refiners organized protests. Newspapers called it a conspiracy to destroy independent business. Several state legislatures opened investigations. The railroad companies publicly disavowed the scheme under pressure and formally canceled it. But Rockefeller had already gotten what he needed: the credible threat of those shipping rates and the demonstrated willingness of the railroads to negotiate secretly with Standard Oil gave him a weapon in every subsequent negotiation with independent refiners. He didn't need the rebate scheme to continue operating. He needed competitors to believe it could come back, and they did. In the first 3 months of 1872, Rockefeller approached every significant oil refinery in Cleveland. There were 26 of them, and he made each one the same offer. He sat across the table from the owner. He opened his books, or enough of them to make the point. He showed his shipping rates. He showed his production costs per barrel. He showed his cost to manufacture barrels, to move crude, to process byproducts. And then he placed the numbers side by side with the refinery owner's known cost structure and let the arithmetic speak. The message was clear without being spoken. You cannot compete with these numbers. You can sell to us today at a price that gives you something, or you can try to compete and end up with nothing. The choice is yours. But it is not really a choice. 22 of the 26 sold in 90 days. The 2 that held out were methodically undercut on price until they could no longer operate profitably. Both were acquired within 2 years. This became known as the Cleveland Massacre, but it was not a massacre in any violent sense. There were no threats, no physical intimidation, no illegal coercion. It was purely economic. Rockefeller had built a cost structure so superior that the market itself delivered the outcome he wanted. The independent refiners weren't bullied into selling. They were shown a mathematical reality and made a rational decision. That distinction matters, because it meant the entire process was, at that moment, technically legal, and it meant it could be replicated in every other city in America, which is exactly what happened. Cleveland in 1872, Pittsburgh in 1874, Philadelphia in 1875, New York in 1877. By 1878, just 6 years after those 90 days in Cleveland, Standard Oil controlled 90% of all oil refining capacity in the United States. 90%. The remaining 10% existed only because Rockefeller had not yet decided it was worth the effort to acquire it. Controlling 90% of American refining created a problem that Rockefeller had not faced before. Not a competitive problem, a legal one. At the time, corporate law in most American states prohibited one company from owning stock in another company incorporated in a different state. Standard Oil of Ohio could not legally own Standard Oil of Pennsylvania. The empire Rockefeller had built was legally fragmented, held together by informal agreements and personal trust rather than formal corporate structure. In 1882, Rockefeller's attorney, Samuel Dodd, developed a solution that had no legal precedent: the trust. Here is how it worked. The shareholders of all the Standard Oil affiliate companies, Ohio, Pennsylvania, New York, and the rest, transferred their stock certificates to a central board of 9 trustees. Rockefeller held the largest individual position on that board. In exchange for their shares, the original owners received trust certificates that entitled them to a proportional share of the combined dividends of all the affiliates. The trustees then operated all the companies as a single unified enterprise, coordinating pricing strategy across state lines, allocating production between refineries for maximum efficiency, negotiating jointly with suppliers and railroads, and eliminating internal competition between affiliates. It was, in every practical sense, one company. But legally, it was a collection of separate entities managed by a common board. The trust structure was immediately copied by other industries: steel trusts, sugar trusts, whiskey trusts. The word trust entered the American vocabulary as a synonym for monopoly, but Standard Oil was the original, and it operated with complete legal impunity for 9 years, until the Ohio Supreme Court ruled in 1892 that the trust arrangement violated the Standard Oil of Ohio charter. Rockefeller's response took less than a year. He dissolved the trust and restructured the entire operation under the holding company laws of New Jersey, which had recently amended its corporate statutes specifically to attract large business combinations. Standard Oil of New Jersey became the parent company, legally owning the shares of all the affiliates that the trust had previously controlled informally. Same economic structure, same unified management, same 90% market share, different legal form. The lesson that the entire American corporate world absorbed from this episode was not lost on future generations of business lawyers. When the law in one jurisdiction becomes inconvenient, don't fight the law. Find a more favorable jurisdiction and restructure. It is a strategy that multinational corporations still use today, more than a century later. By 1900, Standard Oil was not merely a refining company. It was the closest thing to a privately owned utility that America had ever seen. The company controlled approximately 91% of oil refining. It owned 20,000 miles of pipeline. It operated its own tanker fleet for international shipments. It had its own marketing organization that sold kerosene directly to retail customers in every major American city, undercutting any independent distributor who tried to compete. It employed over 100,000 people. Its annual revenues exceeded the budget of most American states, and critically, it set prices, not market prices, administered prices. Rockefeller's organization could look at any geographic market, assess what independent distributors were charging, price below them until those distributors went out of business, and then raise prices again once the competition was gone. This practice, predatory pricing, was systematic and deliberate. It was not about efficiency. It was about elimination. Investigative journalist Ida Tarbell documented all of it in meticulous detail in her 19-part series for McClure's magazine, published between 1902 and 1904. Tarbell had a personal connection to the story. Her father had been an independent oil producer in Pennsylvania, financially ruined during the Cleveland Massacre era. She spent 5 years gathering evidence, interviewing former Standard Oil employees, obtaining internal documents through sources inside the company, and building a legal quality case against the entire operation. Her work named names, documented specific transactions, and laid out the railroad rebate scheme and the predatory pricing strategy with the kind of precision that left no room for denial. The series landed on the desk of President Theodore Roosevelt, who had built his political brand on confronting concentrated corporate power. In 1906, the federal government filed an antitrust suit against Standard Oil under the Sherman Antitrust Act of 1890. The case took 5 years. Standard Oil's defense argued that it had simply built a better, more efficient business, that the lower prices consumers paid for kerosene were evidence of competition working, not monopoly abuse. The government argued that the railroad rebate scheme, the predatory pricing, and the deliberate elimination of competitors constituted an illegal conspiracy in restraint of trade. In May 1911, the United States Supreme Court ruled unanimously. Standard Oil was an illegal monopoly. It had to be broken up into independent companies within 6 months. The dissolution created 34 separate entities. Standard Oil of New Jersey became ExxonMobil. Standard Oil of New York became Mobil, later merged back into ExxonMobil. Standard Oil of Indiana became Amoco, later acquired by BP. Standard Oil of California became Chevron. Standard Oil of Ohio was eventually acquired by BP. Continental Oil became Conoco. Atlantic Richfield became Arco. The combined market capitalization of the 34 successor companies, once they were freed to operate and compete independently in a rapidly expanding automobile market, far exceeded the market value of the unified Standard Oil before the breakup. The government considered the ruling a landmark victory for antitrust enforcement. Rockefeller considered it the most profitable event of his life. He held proportional shares in all 34 successor companies. When those companies were released into a gasoline market growing at extraordinary speed, driven by the mass adoption of the automobile, their individual stock prices surged. Within 2 years of the Supreme Court ruling, the combined value of Rockefeller's holdings in the successor companies had nearly doubled his net worth. The man the government had just found guilty of running an illegal monopoly and restraint of trade became significantly richer as a direct consequence of its court-ordered dismantling. It remains one of the most extraordinary unintended consequences in the history of antitrust law, and it raises a question that economists and legal scholars have been debating ever since. If breaking up a monopoly doubles the founder's wealth, what exactly did the breakup accomplish? John D. Rockefeller gave away more than $500 million during his lifetime, approximately $8 billion in today's dollars. He funded the University of Chicago from its founding in 1890. He established the Rockefeller Institute for Medical Research, which became Rockefeller University, and produced 26 Nobel laureates. His General Education Board built schools across the American South during a period when public education for Black Americans was systematically underfunded. The Rockefeller Foundation, created in 1913, funded the campaigns that eradicated hookworm across the American South and contributed to the development of the yellow fever vaccine. He died in 1937 at the age of 97. His fortune, distributed across 5 generations of heirs and dozens of philanthropic institutions, is estimated today at $8 to $10 billion in total family wealth. That number sounds almost modest compared to where it started. But that is the nature of wealth distributed across generations and channeled through institutions. It transforms from a number on a balance sheet into buildings, universities, hospitals, and endowments that outlast anyone's ability to track them back to their origin. The companies Standard Oil became are still among the largest corporations on Earth. ExxonMobil and Chevron together represent hundreds of billions of dollars in market capitalization. The pipeline infrastructure, the refinery networks, the distribution systems, the physical architecture of American energy that Rockefeller built between 1863 and 1911, has been expanded and modernized, but never fundamentally redesigned. The next time you fill your car with gas, there is a reasonable chance that the infrastructure making that transaction possible traces its operational lineage directly back to decisions a 24-year-old bookkeeper made in Cleveland in 1863 with a $4,000 investment and a question: why are we paying someone else for something we could control ourselves? He started with a toll booth strategy in an industry full of lottery players. He built the most complete private control of a national economy that the industrialized world has ever seen. He was punished for it by the highest court in the land and got richer. And the structure he invented, vertical integration, the holding company, the trust, the systematic elimination of competition through cost asymmetry rather than violence, became the operating manual for American corporate capitalism in the 20th century. Standard Oil is gone. The playbook it wrote is still in use.